Hi, my name is Marisa Bozarth. I'm the Museum Curator of History for the Burlington County Division of Parks, and we're excited to bring to you another series of our artifact highlights here at the Lyceum. We're going to introduce you to a few artifacts that aren't necessarily always seen by the public, some that are, but you might not always know the story behind them. So we're very excited to be able to share these with you. This is a giant sloth vertebrae. This was actually found in Mount Laurel in the 1950s when they were building the turnpike. So exit 4 of the turnpike, when it was being constructed, a young boy went wandering through the construction zone where the ground was all torn up and came across this guy here. It was reported, ended up being turned over to the Academy of Natural Sciences in Philadelphia for identification, and they determined that it is the vertebrae of a giant sloth. You might be wondering, why the heck is a giant sloth in Mount Laurel? Well, during the last ice age, animals like the giant sloth were wandering around our area. It was frozen ground and tundra. It was the perfect environment for animals like this. If you've ever seen the movie Ice Age, picture that wandering around Burlington County, right? We had not only giant sloths, but giant beaver. They were like the size of a minivan. If you can compare that to a beaver today, looked exactly the same, just huge. Had mastodons walking around, saber-toothed cats, caribou, which a caribou is basically an untamed reindeer, becomes a reindeer once it's been domesticated. But the sloth was one of them as well, and you can just see this is one vertebrae for the sloth. They were humongous. They were on average, if they would stand up on two legs, they were about the size of 2 cars stacked on top of each other. Walking around, and were, in terms of their habits, very similar to the sloth we have today. They've adapted into what we have today. So they were slow, like we always see them. They were very slow moving. They ate off of the trees. But a lot of people find it really hard to believe that things like this were living right where we live today. It's hard to imagine that things like this were living in our area. And there's a couple theories on why they ended up going extinct or adapting, or why we don't find them around anymore, why they disappeared from our area when they did. And one of those things is because when the Ice Age ended, they couldn't survive here. Most of these types of animals would not have been able to live. So they ended up migrating. Some of them went north, where it was still colder, towards upstate New York, Canada. They would start moving that way. Some of them didn't make it, unfortunately, because as ice melts, you end up with huge ponds, and they can't swim. And they would end up falling into pits, not being able to get out. They didn't have the food that they needed any longer. They were at much less, there was much less supply of the types of things that they needed to survive. So they ended up, going extinct or shifting up north. They find a lot of fossils similar to this further north that don't date as far back as these, which is why they are able to determine they probably started moving in that direction. But it's pretty interesting. If you're ever driving down the turnpike, when you get to exit 4, you can think, oh my gosh, there was a giant sloth that wandered right where we are, and try and imagine living amongst that at any given time. A lot of people, it's kind of hard to believe that they were wandering around Burlington County. You can't imagine it today, so.